Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the last regular session of the Farm to Institution Midwest Summit. This session is titled Using Foodways Programming to Help Communities Build Resiliency. Please also join us today at 1 p.m. for the closing keynote address by Hailey Voss, President of the Sugarbush Foundation Board of Directors. My name is Sam Crowell. I am the Associate Director of Sustainability at Ohio University, and I will serve as moderator for this session. I'd like to remind everyone that this session is being recorded and transcribed, and your camera and microphone have been turned off. The chat feature is available. Please use it during the presentation to say hello, to comment, and to ask questions. I will monitor the chat throughout the presentation and will ask the presenters any questions as time permits. If you would prefer to ask your question in person, you will have the ability at the end of the presentation to turn your camera and microphone on and directly ask your questions to the presenters. Or, as mentioned, you can type everything in the chat and I will be monitoring that. This presentation will discuss the process of building resiliency through the use of Foodways programming. It will share how the use of narrative inquiry, community-based learning theory, and experiential learning all come together to help individuals build resilience one tasty bite at a time. This session is led by an Ohio University professor and his student whose multi-generational family lives off the land, and she will discuss how that practice has encouraged a greater support for and understanding of how best to nourish oneself. Session presenter Thom Stevenson holds an MA from Antioch University, a master's certificate in educational public policy from Ohio University, a BA from Governor State University, and an AAS in food service management certificate from Sinclair Community College. Thom is an assistant professor of instruction and serves as the Dean's Fellow for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion for the Patton College of Education at Ohio University. Thom is currently working on a PhD in philosophy, leadership, and change from the Graduate School of Antioch University, and he is certified in sales, customer service, hotel analytics, and is a CHE, a certified hospitality educator. Before becoming a professor, Thom worked to create his own nonprofit, Chef Vet, as well as worked for Ohio State University, Hyatt Corporation, Columbus Hospitality, and the Cancer Support Community of Central Ohio. Thom teaches classes in restaurant operations, intro to food production, catering, food and culture, and serve safe food handling. His major research interests include foodways, sustainability, food with a mission, universal design, and organizational behavior, organizational change. Thom is joined today by Angela Miller, a restaurant, hotel, and tourism major at Ohio University. Angela is from Collins, Ohio, a village near Cedar Point in Lake Erie. Thom and Angela, the virtual floor is yours.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today. Once again, my name is Thom Stevenson, and I'm an assistant professor of instruction here in the Restaurant, Hotel, and Tourism program in the Patton College. And I'm excited to talk to you today about using Foodways programming to help connect with and build resiliency. In addition, I also have my co-presenter, as Sam had introduced, Angela Miller, with me today, and she's a student in our program. Say hi, Angela.
Hi, everyone.
As a professor and practitioner in the restaurant industry, I can tell you that these are complicated times in our industry. Pre-COVID, 50% of every food dollar in the US was spent in restaurants. What that means is that there's been a myriad of challenges that's been created by our industry. Challenges over time resulted in food waste, staffing challenges, and utility usage. And as our industry continues to grow, we continue to see these changes exacerbated. Restaurants are a direct reflection of our societal wants and needs. When I was young, a restaurant experience happened at the culmination of a long week. A Friday paycheck was cashed by my father and mother, and off to a local pizza place we would go. My grandfather came from a generation where food was looked at as a way to connect or be connected. Food service locations also served as a way to help others to become connected to a greater community at large. My grandfather loved the old counter style of seating, where you would know the server's name, the owner's family, and the menu item of the day. The shift in our industry is a direct reflection of just how busy we are today in our daily lives. Our use of food has ventured from a way to connect and a way to sustain ourselves and a way to reinforce community connections to a way where convenience, grab and go, and inexpensive options have taken a stronger role. The shift has challenged us in a way that we have not seen before. My hope is that this presentation would underscore the need for why we must rethink the way in which food is engaged within our daily habits and venture backwards in a way, but more informed in a way that helps meet our societal needs. Society needs connection and healthy nourishment can go a long way in helping us to be prepared to connect and reconnect. The sense of community sits as a third leg of the stool in relation to be resilient. COVID-19, as we come out of what that looks like now, the overarching challenges, excluding a loss of life, and the overall general fear that many are still living through, are stated in this recent survey. A recent study highlights that the many ways in which COVID-19 created disconnects in our current day-to-day activities. These disconnects are not limited to, but are restrictions on movement and travel. We have seen a dramatic change in our lifestyle to a less active role. We have seen an increased level of boredom and monotony. And for many, there has been an increased level of uncertainty about the future. This uncertainty comes at a time when our world is becoming even more complicated and difficult to manage the resources at hand. This graph shows a slide that this COVID-19 challenges coupled with our increased agricultural needs present some unique and unforeseeable challenges. The agricultural landscape looks substantially different than when I first entered the industry. This slide illustrates the complex nature of what resources will be needed to help sustain us with food systems in the next century. Our world is on pace to see a 2.2 billion global population growth, with an increase of 50% need for food, feed, and biofuel. We will also see a 100% crop demand increase by 2050 and a 70% calorie demand. Our disconnects to our food system prevent substantial challenges. We here in the US see food as the single largest component taking up space in US landfills, making up to 22% of multiple solid waste. My question for you is, as I show you this next slide, is those challenges coupled with staffing challenges are some examples of what we could potentially see in the future. This new changes has encouraged many growing trends in our industry. One growing trend is to use technology to step in where gaps are in place. I'm talking to a group today to share to what can be an overarching question. Is this the future of our food system? Here we see Flippy, the hamburger flipping robot, a salad making machine that helps create and choose from 10 different toppings, a roving virtual bartender, and so on. Will the food of tomorrow and the way it is being served look like futurist renderings have often portrayed food? I would hope not. From a very young age, we forge a very personal relationship with food. This relationship with food and the persons who make it is steeped in tradition and care for those involved. We choose and or select our comfort foods at a very young age. Research states that we choose our comfort food at ages 2 to 3 years old. If we become disconnected to the food we choose and how it is chosen, could that create long-term challenges to the systems that are involved in the process? Systems like farming and communal gardening, and fellowship are important ways in which communities form bonds to and with one another, and they have been that way since time began. Those challenges, coupled with the opportunities that we have seen thus far recently with COVID and our increase in service, says to us that we must pay attention to the way in which food affects our daily life. The way that we make decisions about how and where and why we purchase food items are even more important when you put the ramifications of choice into perspective for what we learn at a very young age. How and why we choose food is ever changing. If we take into account that our poor practices are set early on, recent research shows that a direct connection to our food system is wanted. But people are still trying to figure out how to make that happen. Students say in class to me that convenience, grab and go, and cost play a dominant role. Gen Z, when surveyed nationally, show a want for new food and beverage items. They show an increase in wanting to have local systems in place. They also show a want for new food and beverage items. Those surveyed are interested in understanding the values of the company, and they see sustainability as a needed focus. Interesting enough, consumers even state that the term comfort food means what they had when they were growing up. So many students and individuals understand that the comfort food process is important to them, and many of them say that they would revert back to comfort foods in times of stress. So it is in this practice that makes using good food systems practices necessary and invaluable in efforts to help resiliency, which makes common sense. When people are comforted, they feel safer, and therefore they find the needed strength to navigate through challenging times. Challenging times call for practices that are ingrained in us. The lack of the ability to gather has caused us a myriad of challenges. I have heard it said that when we gather for events, it is how we process time. It is also this process that helps us feed literally and figuratively off the energy that a community can bring to the table. In one study, 92% of individuals surveyed plan to do more community engagement in 2022. And cooking was one of the activities that rose to the top of the list. Other experiential learning activities were denoted, and for many, it became about carving dollars out of their own finances to help those to fully participate. It is in this idea of resiliency and building that skill that the hospitality is now tapping into as an industry. This diagram does a great job of showing the ways in which building resiliency helps us better understand the dynamics at play. There are a multitude of infographics that do a great job of laying out resiliency theory, but this diagram for me gets to the very nature of why resiliency is important in the struggle for our own humanity and the spaces that are made for us. I have included a slide that helps show and highlight 4 of the entities that are now playing a role in using hospitality, cooking, and food systems in efforts to help communities build resiliency. The left-hand side of the slide shows the Edward Learning Institute, which is located in Cleveland, Ohio. This location may look like any other office team, but all individuals in this photograph have lived through the process of being incarcerated. All of these individuals have came out of the incarceration role to now work in a full service French Brigade restaurant open 7 days a week, doing 100 covers a day. The second photograph on the top right-hand side, Hot Chicken Takeover, is an entity housed out of Columbus, which has over 350 individuals all working out of what is housing insecure scenarios, all working to learn financial literacy, all working a new job skill, all working to become part of a bigger community. The bottom photograph, Freedom a la carte, which is also housed out of Columbus, is an entity that has used Foodways programming, training, and education as these individuals have all been part of the human trafficking scenario that has presented itself in the US. The middle photograph, Ornery Vets Cafe, located right here in Athens, was created to help support veterans as they work through what is the onboarding process of coming back to society. The good work of all these people are a representation of what Foodways programming, intentionality, and the concept of resiliency can do when put together. One entity that's not shown here is the partnership that our program has currently with STAR, the Ohio Restaurant Association, the Educational Foundation, and ACENET, where 35 plus individuals have all learned the restaurant industry while at STAR, while they are working their way out of what is the incarceration system. That entity has trained 30 plus males, preparing them to come back into the workforce. The good work that all these entities are doing are tying into something that is intrinsically within us. Dr. Gary Smalley has an infographic that helps explain how that works. So out of Food and Love by Dr. Gary Smalley, he states that food affects our emotional health, that emotional health affects our relationships, and that our relationships then affect our physical health. And that in turn affects our emotional and psychological health, which affect our food choices, and so on and so on. Recently, chefs were interviewed in the last 2 years about what they anticipate seeing in the hospitality industry. And it's interesting to note because it is a direct reflection of the challenges that have happened during COVID. In our industry, trends are looked at continually in hopes to meet the value proposition guests are seeking. Chefs as leaders in our industry often have the pulse on what we see as next steps. Chefs are all saying the same thing in their own way. The future of food looks like one where customers and providers are in commune with the ways and items in which they are nourished with. I love this phrase touted that the food would be personal and unapologetic. Comfort food is sticking around, and it is in that phraseology that once again reinforces our needs as individuals interested in food systems to have a poignant role to play. This slide and the shifts that we see over COVID are falling directly in line with what research says about how we process trauma and how we tap into resiliency and the support of our respected communities. Over 1/2 of consumers surveyed stated that they are cooking more now than ever. And almost half of those surveyed randomly stated that they are baking more. And in a couple slides, we'll talk about why that is so important. This slide says that individuals who have learned these new skills and how to use the food that is at hand are finding that these newfound skills will be ones that will stay in place. When asked if this process in cooking and using their newfound skills would stay in place, 7 out of 10 individuals stated that they would remain cooking past the COVID-19 pandemic. The increase in cooking is being driven by the fact that many feel healthier, are becoming more confident, and that they feel better in general when they make their own food. It is the intrinsic nature of food and its preparation and sometimes sharing that reinforce all of those positive attributes. Today, I am glad that we have Angela Miller with us to share her family's pathway to food resiliency. As a student who lived through it and is learning the skills to be in our industry, I'm excited for Angela to share.
Hi, everyone. My name is Angela Miller. I am majoring in restaurant, hotel, and tourism here at Ohio University. I started in the hospitality industry about 5 years ago at my job where I live near Sandusky at a water park, and there I learned my passion for helping people have a good time and helping them meet their end goal. So today I come to you with a few accessories. First off being this lasagna, and to further reinforce Thom's theme of comfort food, this is something that I find very comforting and that has followed me all the way until college. Second, this is a can of tomatoes from a garden that was grown by my family. These tomatoes were actually used to make the sauce that you saw in the lasagna, and 2 types of herbs. The first being oregano, which was dehydrated from my grandma's herb garden, also used in lasagna, and lovage, which is a celery-like herb that was also from my grandma's garden and inside the lasagna. In front of you, you see my grandma's recipe card, obviously well loved. This is my family. I come from a family who tries to practice a zero-waste lifestyle as closely as we can. I live with my grandparents, who you see pictured, and they have instilled a passion for clean and meaningful eating in my life. My grandfather was raised on a farm, and he carried that practice into his professional life and was a farmer for many years. My grandma was taught to cook and raised by her grandmother, partially, who had 5 kids in the Great Depression. So as you can imagine, they had to make things stretch. So learning this ability to preserve things and stretch things is where I learned this skill also. An example of how we do this in my own household is any scraps that we have, we take into a bag and we take them into the woods for all the animals to eat, whether it be eggshell scraps, produce scraps like carrot tops, tomatoes, or even meat scraps, because the animals are happy to have it no matter what. So what you see in front of you is a garden. I will touch on that in a second. I want to talk about the things that you can do before you get to that point. So being sustainable does not have to be growing your own food, butchering your own food. It can be something like supporting your local farmers instead of going to Walmart for your produce, or going to a local butcher to get a better package deal, because oftentimes they will sell you the meat cheaper, the produce cheaper, and it is always a better quality because it is fresh and there's no added preservatives. They don't have to spray it with anything to make it last longer. And by doing this and supporting local causes, you are taking your food dollar and putting it back into your community. And not only that, you are cutting down on the greenhouse emission gases that are emitted from the trucks and all of the methods of transportation that have to get that meat and produce into our stores. So touching on what you see in front of you, if you do have the time to garden and you want to implement it in any way, it can be as simple as this. You can repurpose milk jugs or egg cartons, anything that you can find. And it's great because in the name of being sustainable, you are giving these things that would normally break down pretty quickly a second life. So you can do this in a windowsill, a porch, anywhere. You don't have to have acres of land to garden. So to tell you how much and beneficial it would be, I looked at the price of tomatoes here in Athens as of a few days ago, and they are about 50 cents per tomato. So you can get 1 packet of tomato seeds for about $1.50. So each plant in harvest season will produce about 30 to 90 tomatoes. So per tomato plant, you are saving $15 to $45 on tomatoes, and those tomatoes can be preserved like this to help you sustain that all year just for your $1.50 investment, rather than buying tomatoes each time where you could only get 3 of them for the same price. So for my family, this investment has looked like this. What you're seeing in front of you is all of the things that we grow currently in our garden or have grown at some point over the years. So there is tomatoes, corn, asparagus, peppers, peas, sweet potatoes, okra, cucumber, zucchini, eggplant, Brussels sprouts, wax beans, raspberries, blackberries, melons, basil, lovage, oregano, dill, chives, and parsley. So everything you see with a dashed E next to it is a perennial, so it does come back every year. So instead of making this one-time investment, you are now making a forever investment so long as you take care of the plants and help them to come back up the next year. Most herbs are perennials, and that's a great thing because you can dehydrate them like I showed you. This investment for my family has looked like $200 about a year. It's important to note how much these plants will produce in harvest season. So that is why we emphasize preservation, like with the cans or the dehydrating, because you want to make it last. like I just showed you, that was before we made the lasagna, so there's obviously a little less product now. They will, like I said, those plants will produce a lot. So this is what deters people from gardening. They don't want to waste things because nobody likes to waste their money and nobody likes to see food go to waste. So by doing this, you ensure, one, that you're being sustainable, two, that you're getting the most out of your money, and three, that you are nourishing yourself for a long amount of time. So we will take tomatoes like you see up there, and we will have them for spaghetti sauces, for chilies, for soups, anything like that. These herbs can be used in any way that you can imagine. We used it today in the ricotta cheese and in the sauce. Another great way to preserve things is freezing. And we typically do this with bell peppers or corn. This was last harvest season at my house. In the left picture, you can actually see out the window our garden in the background, the corn plants still. We got 33 bags of corn out of all of this that you see. There was tons more corn than that. That was just some that I got a picture of. The Ziploc bags are still in our freezer, and I actually brought one to Athens with me last time I came to heat up and have, and it tastes so much better. It reminds me of home, and it's a great thing to have around. And these foods have no additives, and you can really control what you put into it. So if you want a little bit of salt or something, you can put it in there instead of it being preserved and it having a crazy salt content. So there's a student aspect that I'm here to provide today, and that is that what Thom touched on is convenience. And we're all busy and learning how to navigate being in college, doing things like that, and nourish ourselves at the same time. So the dining hall or fast food was, at first for me, a very viable option. And I know for my peers it is as well. But like I said earlier, sustainability is not a one-size-fits-all experience, and it's not an all or nothing experience. So even if you go to Jeff Market and get a thing of strawberries and you have it in your room instead of grabbing a bag of chips, or you go to the farmers market, which are accessible to us because our student IDs give us the bus pass. So during harvest season or any season, they will have what they can produce in the season. And it's a great way to, one, again, support your local community because we are in Athens currently. So we want to try to give back to that as much as we can. And two, it is so much better for you. And even implementing this 2 times a week is miles better than not doing it. And once you do, it'll become more practice and you can implement it more, and small steps will lead to a better lifestyle. Making an investment like this, you will make a difference, and no matter what, you are trying. So connecting to this food, when I showed you the lasagna, I mentioned it was a comfort food, and Thom reiterated the importance of comfort foods. So cooking things like this is something that is very special in my family. Cooking with emotion is something that was taught to me from my grandma, or when we decorate like Christmas cookies together, it's always a very humbling and togetherness experience. So cooking with my family has always provided me a safety net. And now that I am 200 miles away from that safety net, it was kind of jarring, and it just makes you feel a little less safe. So in ways to find that safety, I have called my grandma many times. How do I make this recipe? How do I make that recipe? It's her sending me recipes back and forth every day. And for the first time, it's always shaky. You call back over and over and ask, but you're building that connection and learning how to make that safety for yourself that you can pass on to another generation one day. And that's a really important theme. In my family specifically, it is mostly Italian recipes that we hold near and dear to my heart because my grandma has a lot of Italian in her genes, and we try to keep that theme in our family to remember the generations before us because they did such a good job of passing it down to us. So when I feel like I want to remember my family or I start missing them, I start to cook, and that is why emotional connections to food are very important.
Thank you so much, Angela, for sharing. And I can tell you that the lasagna tastes incredible. I've had it one time before, and so regularly Angela stops by my office or by the kitchen and drops off items from her grandmother's kitchen, and I'm so thankful for her to share. I can tell you it's an interesting time when students first walk in the classroom. When students look at me and they say to me They're like, I've never cooked in the kitchen, or I've cooked in the kitchen substantially. I can see this look of challenge slash opportunity slash vision slash passion slash fear. And many of them will say to me, I'm afraid of losing something, or I'm afraid of wasting something, or I'm afraid of ruining something, or I'm afraid of making mistakes. And we all know that making mistakes is part of learning. So what if our food cycle looked like this? If we actually took a step back and we took what was Dr. Smalley's work, and then we used what is the research around how and what and why we nourish ourselves the way we do, could be built this way. So what if nourishment selection and fulfillment through educated and mindful food choices was the #1 goal right from the very beginning? So we took out of the equation things that make it difficult to find food, or things that make it difficult to choose them, or things that make it difficult for people to know how to make food. And what if that led into the self-production of food items for ourselves and for others? Food typically comes, good food, the food that we all want to eat, typically comes directly from the heart. From the heart, through the head, to the heart, out the hands. All of that engages the serotonin within our own head. All of that supports what is this greater understanding of why food is important, and why sharing it is with one another can be a process that helps us be stronger in nature. In turn, what happens is that those good behaviors reflect a sense of self-control and self-reliance, which we've kind of lost throughout this COVID period. We've lost this ability to understand or think of what tomorrow might look like. It's, this variant or that variant. Stop, start, together, apart, together, apart. So if we can use what is that self-control and self-reliance with our own food system, we can take that into creating good habits that reflect positive efficacy, and therefore are reinforced over and over again. Meanwhile, our physical and emotional and psychological self are all taking that into account. And then positive, productive habits, they fill greater societal wants and needs, as well as our own. And therefore, that helps us build communities. One of the earliest studies that came out in reference to communities were done in native tribes in India. There were 2 tribes. There was one tribe that worked together, created food, made food with one another, shared that food with one another as a resource. There was another tribe that was much more opportunistic. That tribe made food for themselves. That tribe did not share. That tribe had a myriad of other challenges that presented itself. The tribe that made food together and shared it with one another survived and thrived. The tribe that did not do that, the tribe that was more opportunistic, and the tribe that was much more individualistic, that tribe ceased to exist and is no longer with us today. It's not just me saying that making our own food helps. It's not just Dr. Smalley or a myriad of other researchers, but there's some specific reasons why making our own food helps us to feel better. One study that was just done recently found that baking classes boosted confidence and increased concentration. Another study revealed that a little creativity and creation in the kitchen can make people feel happier in general. And this study was just published in the Journal of Positive Psychology. And that study suggests that people who frequently take on small creative projects like baking or cooking report that feeling more relaxed and more happier in general in their everyday lives. Cooking can be so good for your emotional well-being. It can do all kinds of incredible things like treat depression and anxiety. It can support eating disorder reduction, support ADHD and addiction. And so counselors have been interviewed over the last 3 years, and all of them said that cooking can help soothe stress, build self-esteem, and curb negative thinking, because some of the processes that are involved in that take the mind and encourage it to be here now, to encourage to focus on the moment that is at hand. I often say to students when they come in the classroom, I'll say, for the next 3 hours, whatever happens outside that doorway, we're going to leave outside of there. For the next 3 hours, we're going to focus on being here now. At times, I often challenge our students to say, think about the hands that grew this food, the hands that made this food, the wind and the weather and the sun and the things that were in the right place at the right time to make this food come to fold and fruition like it did. Psychologists believe that cooking and baking are therapeutic because they fit a type of therapy known as behavior activation. What that does is that it says that this is something that I can actually have control over, something that I can take responsibility for. This falls directly in the face of areas that are food insecure. And this even stresses an even greater need for why we need to take responsibility for communities that are food insecure, and why we need to help provide resources and training and tools. Because if we are to become more resilient after an experience like COVID, we have to have good tools in place to make that happen. While any form of altruism can help people feel happy and connected to others, cooking for others helps people fulfill needs, and that is important. It helps them feel biological needs, it helps them feel psychological needs, it helps them feel connected to the community. And so at the end of the day, there is something so powerful about your ability to take raw ingredients and turn them into something that is so practical, yet so positive from a nourishing standpoint. When we give to others, it fills a need within us. It's the reason why we make chicken noodle soup and drop it off to people when they are sick. It's a reason why we make chocolate chip cookies and bring them to teachers or friends. It's a reason why we make food items. And the first thing that we say when someone has passed is, what can I bring that family to have to be nourished with? This need for survival and the need to be fed is a powerful need that, if fulfilled, it can take this good act of giving and help ourselves become more resilient in nature. And it's helped us in a very primal way. There's a myriad of ways that we can help make changes. For those that are in this presentation, for those that are in our respective communities. So what I'm sharing with you today are some examples of how we can make small differences. I think Angela shared a handful of things that they do in their own family. And so first and foremost, what we can learn to do is to grow our own food. Using some of the techniques shared by Angela and her family experience, even a small container patio pot of herbs can make a difference. I often say to students, I say to them, spring's coming. Are you ready to start the planting season? And they look at me and they say, spring's coming. I'm ready to go to Kroger's and buy fresh lettuces. And I challenge them to think differently about how food comes to the table. You know, we're lucky in Athens, we have a great farmer's market. But research will say that one of the reasons why people will only go to the farmer's market once or twice is because they're not sure what to do with the menu items or the ingredients when they get them. And so there's a reason why we're eating out 4 and 5 times a week. And there's a reason why grab and go has taken such a strong hold. In addition, one of the things that we can learn to do is learn to cook again. You know, every time I go home, my mother takes me into the kitchen and we make peanut butter fudge. And my mother makes peanut butter fudge in the aluminum pan that my grandmother owned. And my grandmother had 17 children. Angela's family was big. Mine was way bigger. And so my grandfather was a truck driver. My grandmother made food for 17 children. And I can tell you that, interesting enough, when I go back and I talk to my mom about cooking in the kitchen, my mom says to me, see that sign that's over the door, Tom? This is Mom's kitchen. There's an ownership that happens there. When we learn to cook and when we share that with others, we can take ownership of our own lives again. And we know with COVID and the other things that's been happening, we need to do that at this stage of the game. There are cooking classes that are offered all the time. In our college, we have discovery cooking classes. We have an event coming up March 21st which we're going to make Botswana cuisine. And we're going to do it with a professor who's from Botswana, making her recipe. We've been doing discovery kitchens. We hope that you'll look for those and you'll want to attend one of those. Our goal is to teach you how to cook something or being willing to cook something and do it in a way where you're not afraid if you make a mistake. In addition, you can advocate for cooking labs to be put back into K through 12. Family and consumer science classes play a vital role in helping individuals cook and prepare food and be prepared to make food for themselves and for their communities. There was a growing trend in the last 5 to 7 years for family and consumer science labs to be taken out of school systems. Our program in the Patton College teaches family and consumer science educators. I can tell you that every one of them we teach, there's a job waiting for them. Researchers, industry professionals, individuals who are making a difference in social enterprise are all saying that cooking is a way to build resiliency no matter what group you come from, no matter what community you come from, and no matter what your skill level. Let's make comfort food great food again to nourish the body well. And let's teach students sooner, earlier. At one time I heard from individuals, they said, you can't teach young kids how to make food. And I would say that we did a cooking class 2 years ago, and pre-COVID in the kitchen, I had 3 and 4-year-olds making enchiladas. I had 3-year-olds taking a handful of cheese, 1 handful of them in the mouth, and 1 hand on the lasagna. And the family, the dad would look at me or the mom would look at me and say, what am I going to do with that? And I said, well, it's your lasagna. So whatever it looks like and whatever it tastes like, it's been made for love by your 3-year-old. I've had parents who have had kids with tactile issues, who don't want to touch things, but are willing to put their hands on the tortilla and willing to put the tortilla in the sauce, and no longer are they concerned about sauce touching their hands. In addition, one of the things that we can do is plan meals and create meal prep nights. Make it fun. I can tell you that we had almost 50 graduate students here making pizzas. We had 12 different countries represented, and all of them were making pizzas for the first time. And the chatter that was in that room at a time when they're getting ready to post their dissertation or their thesis or do all that work, which is one of the most stressful times for them, the chatter and the energy that was in that room could fill 5 football fields. And the volume that was in there said volumes to what it's like to be able to learn how to make your own food. And involve young people, ask them at every age of the game, and tie into that want to be experiential and visual learners. When individuals learn differently, they need different practices in order to connect. When we're in the classroom teaching cooking, we're teaching math and science and all those STEM things that we all talk about is so necessary at that age of life. An additional thing you can do is share the wealth. Back since World War I and World War II, victory kitchens were a concept that was planted originally. Don't just grow the things that you need for yourself, but grow the things that you can need to hand to others. I'm thankful for what Angela shares with me from her family. And I'm thankful that the herbs that sit here will be used in the classroom. And when you're sharing the wealth, you can tie into what people say they want to do, which was back on slides 9 and 10. It says that they want to donate food to pantries when food is left over or plentiful. Laws were just changed recently that said that food that was going to go to waste in catering operations and in restaurants can now be donated without any repercussions if something was to happen. And so donate and grow food and use it to participate in a food system that eliminates leftovers and makes food more plentiful. Some simple changes can happen when you eat out. Some of the things that you can do when you eat out is ask where the food is coming from. Ask how the food is purchased. Ask how far the food has traveled. All those conversations tie into that self-efficacy, which I talked about, that self-resilience, that taking control and responsibility for your food systems. Some additional things you can do is bring your own to-go containers. I know Sam hates plastic. I understand. I'm not a plastic fan either. But I can tell you that having plastic be used in a way, if we're going to use plastic, having plastic be used in a way that can be used continually is a better way to make sure that we're doing as minimal amount of waste as possible. To-go containers are a great way for us to bring leftovers. And so there are so many things that we can do in our industry and in our food systems to make a difference. My challenge for this group watching this presentation is to tie directly into this diagram, to think consciously and to think consistently about the ways in which food is brought to the table. And with that being said, I now would open it up for questions.
Thanks so much, Thom and Angela. That was just terrific. I will make a few comments myself, and then I'll get to at least one of the questions in the chat, and I'll remind all of our attendees that you can ask questions in the chat, or you can raise your hand and we can have your microphone and camera turned on for you to engage with our presenters here directly. But please use the chat if that's the easiest. I first met Thom at Ohio University 4 or 5 years ago when we were organizing a facilities committee on universal design. And Thom has a great deal of experience in a lot of different areas, and he brought his experience with accessibility and universal design to this discussion. Later, I now know him more as a food guy. And the Office of Sustainability started to collaborate with Thom on a number of food-related events. He works with the local community food initiatives on a series called the Discovery Kitchens, and he's talked about this today, preparing meals in the Patton College test kitchen and then sitting down to eat those meals as a community. And he's also been involved with our sustainable Thanksgiving dinner. And throughout all of these interactions with Thom and his students, sustainability, while not the topic of discussion, it's everywhere. For those of you who are well aware of the UN sustainability goals, Thom finds a way to connect with many of those goals throughout his work in the kitchen with students. He mentioned I don't like plastic. He's right, and I have. We all have our direct focus on waste management, not only food waste, but also things like plastic and how we manage them. And that leads me to a question for Angela to start off here. I love the use of the milk jugs and everything you do in your family to reuse things. And it reminds me of my mother-in-law's mother, who during the Great Depression in the 20s and 30s would take rubber bands from broccoli or cauliflower and actually cut them lengthwise so that they would then have two. And it's this whole idea of being able to reuse and rethink about how we have things. And I'm wondering, for your grandmother and grandparents, did that reuse of things was that always been a part of their family, or a lot of us, we're getting ready to do our gardens and we go to the local store and get a bunch of pots and then start the seedlings, etc. But there are other ways to do those things. How did your family start to think along those lines?
Specifically for our garden, it is in our yard, so we don't need any of that. Currently, they are growing our seeds, like our tomato plants and stuff like that, in our basement because they can't put it out before frost, so they don't have to go buy the plants, and they're trying to make it on their own. So, in regards to the reusing of things like bread bags, like when you buy your Nichols bread, like my grandma will wash that out and put it in, or like reusing bags or like butter containers, things like that. Like everything that we package our leftovers in, there's always there's like 6 butter containers in the fridge, and it's always a guess to find where's the butter, because those are the leftovers. It's just things like that. As long as I can remember, it's been like that. I think with my grandparents being raised in a generation where they're parents or their grandparents or their parents were raised in the Depression era, so they really had to make things last or just reuse things the best they could just out of pure necessity and learning that practice. But now it's more so just good to spread your dollar and to spread that plastic container as far as it can go. So for me, and I've only been here for 21 years now, so as long as I can remember, they've always been like that, and I think it's because of their upbringing.
That's terrific. I mean, when we talk about sustainability, we're talking about benefiting people, the environment, as well as sort of economic prosperity, and reusing things hits all three of those. And that's wonderful. We have so much to learn from experienced adults. And I think in this day and age where everything's on social media or on the internet, we forget to have those conversations with the people who learned and knew these things, decades, if not centuries ago, and we have to relearn them. So I think it's terrific that you have such a valuable family.
One of the things I loved, Angela's grandmother, a couple of weeks ago, Angela had an incident in a parking lot, and so, which was not a very positive incident. And so, unfortunately, but she's fine. Yeah. But before she ever got home, her grandmother had baked her homemade bread. And so when she walked in the house, that smell of homemade bread was waiting for her before she ever walked in the door. It's that intrinsic sense of knowing how to make the ones that we love feel comforted. It's the same thing that happens, and it could be at STAR, where we have individuals that are all incarcerated. And we take individuals back in the kitchen, and we're showing them safe food handling. And we're doing it on Memorial Day when they're not with their family. I literally had individuals walk up to me and said, "Why are you with me on Memorial Day, training me about food systems?" And I said to them, I'm like, "You are an important member of our community. We appreciate the gift that you will bring back to the table, literally and figuratively." And this individual, who was a 6'6", 265-pound, fairly imposing guy, looked at me with tears in his eyes and said, "We all make mistakes. I want to know how I can use my connection to food to put food on my family's table." It takes a handful of those times to know that we're onto something, that we're truly onto something when we take what is the very nature of how we select, make, create, and share food. And then we reinforce that behavior again and again and again. And I can tell you that it can play a valuable role in helping students and individuals, 3-year-olds and 70-year-olds, play a role within our community.
That's great. You're getting some virtual applause in the chat.
Yeah, we see the questions now too.
Oh, you do? Okay. So I'll just read this first one. If grab and go is so important in sustaining so many at this time, how can we as a community transform the food being served in this fashion to be local, healthy, hot, and accessible to all income levels? Do you think we could do this by starting so many community cooking clubs?
I think cooking clubs are a great way to do it, quite honestly. I can tell you that I've had faculty in our building ask me if we could prepare meals that they could pick up when they're going home. So I know that Butcher Bites, which is located in the ASNET location, does meals that are grab and go, that are healthy in nature. They're both fitness individuals, and that's kind of the lifestyle that they've chosen, and food is a part of that. So the challenge with most of the grab and go items that we see that are made by larger companies is their goal is to take food and to make it last as long as possible. The challenge with that becomes is that when they do that, they make it so nutrient deficient. They start to take out what are the nutrient value. So food should not, when I worked at Ohio State, we would buy Sun Sprouts. They would be made in Columbus. They would be shipped to Cincinnati, shipped to Cleveland, back to Columbus, and then we would be selling them. They're 2.5 days on a truck before they ever got back. And then I said to them, I think we need to talk about drop shipping the product. And they said, that's not the way distribution works. On one of my earlier slides, this is why chefs feel like they're going to start using more and more local food systems. It's because the local food system is not nearly as broken as the larger food distribution system is. And so to answer your question, yes, it starts very grassroots. I think grab and go is not going away. I think we're getting better with packaging, so plastic will be going away. We had some biodegradable packaging. There's a little bit of challenge with heat and how that plays out. But I think in the long term, a smaller, more local food systems will be one that we see in place, because quite honestly, the larger system, we saw all the challenges with COVID. You know, what the challenges with the barge stuck in Suez Canal did to plastics and did to packaging. And so in now 3 weeks, we don't have straw or whichever other item you need, a lid or any of those things. So I think cooking clubs are a great way to do it. We see it with CFI. We see it with Living Healthy Appalachia. We see it at ACENET. And it's also a great way to encourage more businesses to want to be in the business.
Great point. Okay, we have another question, and this may be the last one. This is for you, Angela. The comment says, Thom and Angela are inspirational. My question is for Angela. I've never heard of louvage, if I'm
Lovage.
Lovage. Is it easy to grow? What do you usually use it in? Do you use the leaves or the stem in the lasagna?
Yeah. So lovage, dehydrated at least. I'll get a stem out. It looks like this. Hold up. There we go. It just looks like any other herb. It is a celery-like almost. Typically, my grandma does not use this in lasagna, but I had it at my disposal because she sent me with it, and I think that's another important thing about food waste is using what's at your disposal. And always, I change recipes that my grandma gives me all the time and just put my own touch on it when I feel like it. So that was just an addition on my part, but she typically uses this in place of celery on a turkey. Like for Thanksgiving, she will absolutely cover it, and that's the most common practice I see her use it in, or soups or stuff like that. When it's dehydrated, you kind of just crumble it all up so the stem naturally goes in with it, because it'll break into a small enough piece. But when you're using the herbs fresh, when they're in season, typically you would remove the stem, just like basil or anything like that. But dehydrated herbs, typically the stems just go in and you don't really notice it.
Yeah, I love how Angela shares it with our other students in class. I think so many times students are not sure how to start the process. And something as simple as a milk jug and some dirt and a seed can be a really powerful way to have small wins. I think when it comes to food systems, the small things amount to this much bigger ability to have both wins and losses. And then when you have that process, it helps build resilience over time. I can see it. We had a student who, I'd like to end with this last thing. I had a student who always wanted to work at Disney. That's what she always wanted to do. Honestly, she wanted to be goofy. She's like, if I get to be goofy in my lifetime, I'll be so happy. So she came into class. She said she wanted to learn how to crack an egg. She's like, I don't know how to crack an egg. I always get tons of shells in it. Da, da, da. So at the start of the semester, we showed her how to crack an egg on the table. By the end of the semester, we have a Top Chef competition. She won first place. Well, that student who was shaking when she asked me the first time about how to crack an egg is now a student who just finished her master's degree. She did become goofy at Disney, and she also is an Open the Princess exhibit at Disney. And she touts her ability to practice making food in the kitchen as a way to give her windows of opportunity to succeed over smaller things, so that therefore she could use that to build upon her ability to succeed at bigger things. There's a real opportunity here to take this process on how we think about food and to use what was how we did it in the past, partnered the way it can be done in the future with the available resources we have, and to use it at a time when the world needs all our gifts.
Thank you so much, Thom and Angela. It is inspirational, and the connections to resiliency and to larger questions of life are just a terrific way to end our regular sessions. I will remind everyone that at 1 p.m. today, we will have the closing keynote address, and we hope to see you all there. Thanks again, Thom and Angela.
Thank you
very much. Have a great day.